Hi, welcome to Coding Bootcamp's YouTube channel. Subscribe now and join our live stream session later. See you.
Welcome to the Responsive Website Design with Bootstrap, a self-paced course from Coding Bootcamps, found at coding-bootcamps.com. I'm Hannah Mace. And a little about me. I had a long history in the art community, and then I found software engineering, and what really drew me was how creative you get to be. It really is its own art form, and every language is, a different medium to paint with. I love that. It's so much fun, and I just love sharing how fun I think it is with other people. So I hope that we get to learn a little bit this course. The synopsis for this course will be as following. We'll first have a Bootstrap overview, which is an introduction to what Bootstrap is, where it comes from, what it's good for. Then we will get into file structure, basically just understanding boilerplate code for your files so that everything works as it should from the beginning before you do anything to it. Then we will talk about the grid system. This is how to physically display items on a web page, and in this instance it would be in a grid. We will then do an overview of the CSS, which is where most of our styling will come from. Then after that, we will talk about typography, which is just different text and how we can display them. After typography, we will get into tables, which is an easy way to display information on your web page. After tables, we'll talk about forms, which is where we directly interact with user input and we store that information for later use. After forms, we'll talk about buttons. There are a plethora of different buttons that we can use. After buttons, we will get into images. After images, we'll talk about the helper class, which is where things will get a little bit more technical. And then we'll end the class talking about Bootstrap 4's new features. So a prerequisite to this class is that if you are not familiar with HTML or CSS already, it is highly recommended that you take this class. Found on learn.coding-bootcamps.com. It's under Introduction to HTML and CSS Programming, because we will not be spending much time going over the basics of either of those. Welcome to part 1 of Intro to Web Design with Bootstrap. What is Twitter Bootstrap? Well, Bootstrap is a powerful mobile-first front-end framework for faster and easier web development. It uses HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. What is Bootstrap? It was created by Twitter. Why would we want to use Bootstrap over another package? Well, it has a mobile-first approach. That means it really is geared specifically for the aspect ratio of our phones. It is also supported by all popular browsers. And like I said earlier, everyone at this point should be familiar with HTML and CSS, but just to quickly go over everything one more time, HTML defines the data and structure of a page using its elements. It's the data that we see, it's the skeleton. CSS then defines the styling of everything and actually gives it the flair and makes it look nice. JavaScript then gives us our functionality as it is our actual programming language that we use. So here's how we're going to get started. Just like with any HTML page, we're going to make sure that we have our boilerplate code. Here's a little shortcut. In a lot of editors, if you go to the top of your HTML page and you do an exclamation point and then hit tab, it will fill in the HTML boilerplate for you. And we can quickly go over our basic HTML elements. Remember that there are titles from H1 to H6 that decreases in size. We have our paragraph tag, which is just P. our simple block element, which is a div, our simple inline element, which is a span, and our image tag. And if you didn't know this already, that image tag is the only one out of them that can be self-closing. You see at the end how it has the /. Everything else has to have two pieces. You have your opener and your closer. The closer starts with the / and then has the same element. Div, / div, image doesn't need that. You could, however, style it in the same way if you wanted to, but you don't have to. Now let's talk about the different ways to use CSS. First, we have inline styling, which is where you style an element directly where you create that element. This is typically done in the HTML file. This has some pros, but it is mostly thought to be a better idea to keep things in the CSS file just so you have a separation of concerns and your code is clean and easy to read. Next, we have a style CSS tag. This is just creating what you would put in a CSS file, but just doing it right in the HTML file. Or we could create an external CSS file, which we'll have to link to in the head. This is what I think is the most typical approach. So why might someone use Bootstrap over another kind of package? Well, Bootstrap is easy, and you can get pretty far just with some HTML, CSS, and Bootstrap. It also has responsive design, which is extremely important in today's use of technology. Responsive design just means that from your phone to your tablet to your computer, the design and layout fits that screen and looks nice. What does the Bootstrap package include? Well, first you'll have your scaffolding. These are basic structure systems that we'll go over more in the section Bootstrap Basic Structure. Bootstrap package also includes CSS. This is going to help you out with fundamental CSS settings that you won't have to worry about. That'll give you the style that they're promising immediately. Components. Bootstrap has a bunch of reusable pre-made components that we'll go over later, but think drop-down menus, nav bars, buttons. The Bootstrap package also includes JavaScript plugins. And lastly, you have the ability to customize essentially everything. So all the components, all the jQuery plugins. This means that not two websites have to look identical to each other, which is fantastic. So to get started with Bootstrap, you're going to want to download the latest version from getbootstrap.com. So that is going to look like this. It'll bring you here where you just hit the download. And downloading Bootstrap is where we're going to stop part 1A. Come back next time for part 1B. See you there. Welcome back to Intro to Web Design with Bootstrap. This is part 1B. Let's talk about file structure. If we look at the precompiled Bootstrap file that we just downloaded from getbootstrap.com, we'll see something similar to this file structure. Here's what a basic HTML template using Bootstrap will look like. It starts the same as any HTML template where we assign our doc type. Then in our head, you'll see some relevant information specifically for Bootstrap, like meta name viewport. After that, you'll see a link to a CSS style sheet that specifically uses Bootstrap styling. After that, we have some commented out information, and then you'll see our script tags, which will link to the JavaScript functionality that Bootstrap uses in their components and such. Onto the body tag, We start with Hello World, and then a note about jQuery plugins, another script tag, this time for our jQuery, and a final script tag for our Bootstrap script. Typically, scripts will be in the bottom of the body. It's good to let everything in the HTML load before you get to the JavaScript functionality. What is the Bootstrap grid system? This is the official statement. Bootstrap includes a responsive, mobile-first fluid grid system that appropriately scales up to 12 columns as the device or viewport size increases. It includes predefined classes for easy layout options, as well as powerful mixins for generating more semantic layouts. To simplify that, Bootstrap 3 starts small, and with the use of a grid system, it can expand effortlessly to any screen size while keeping its proportions. So how do we work a Bootstrap grid system? Well, we use the grid system to create page layouts, and we're going to utilize rows and columns. And here's specifically how the Bootstrap grid system works. Rows are placed within a dot container class for proper alignment and padding. You use rows to create horizontal groups of columns. Content should be placed within the columns, and only columns may be immediate children of rows. Predefined grid classes like .row and .col-xs-4 are available for quickly making grid layouts. LESS mixins can also be used for more semantic layouts. Columns create gutters, also known as gaps between column content, via padding. That padding is offset in the rows for the first and last column via negative margins on dot rows. And grid columns are created by specifying the number of 12 available columns you wish to span. This may not mean a whole lot to you right now, but it'll all make sense once we actually dive into Bootstrap. We also are going to make use of media queries. Media query is a fancy term for conditional CSS rule, and it just means that it applies to some CSS based on certain conditions. The media queries in Bootstrap allow you to move, show, and hide content based on viewport size. The following media queries are used in less files to create the key breakpoints in the Bootstrap grid system. Essentially, this is setting the parameters for when you're going to move from a phone size to a tablet size to a computer size. And then, if you want to add more resources, you should use a CDN, which is Content Delivery Network. You can find more information about that at bootstrapcdn.com. And one last time, a quick look at the link tag that loads the CSS. The script tag loads the JavaScript. Then there's the meta tag, which is used for smaller devices. It disables zooming so that the responsive features of Bootstrap will work. And that's the end of part 1. It's a lot of information to take in at once sometimes, but once you start really playing around and seeing the physical changes, it all makes sense. Thanks so much for checking this out, and I'll see you in part 2.
And welcome back. This is part 2 of Intro to Web Design with Bootstrap. Right now, we're going to look at the options that Bootstrap gives us to make grids. You can see that they section things up based on what device will be viewing the web application. We have extra small devices like phones, small devices like tablets, medium devices such as desktops, and larger desktop devices. Then these are all sectioned off by grid behavior, max container width, class prefix, number of columns, max column width, gutter width, nestable, offsets, and column ordering. Really quickly, what that all means is grid behavior is simply how does this grid function? When it's really small, everything's going to be stacked horizontally because there's just no room to the left or right. But as we get
Thanks for watching. Feel free to add your questions as comments down below.
bigger and wider, there's larger breakpoints. So you'll see that our content will start to spread out as opposed to just being stacked. Max container width, that's a specific pixel value. That means we cannot have a container over this width. And then we have these specific class prefixes that you should use. So we have extra small columns, medium, and large. And then the number of columns for all these devices is just 12, which is super easy and convenient. Also, for your max column width on extra small devices, you won't have to worry about it. It will be taken care of with auto. Then after the number of columns, we have our max column width, which is how big a column can be per device. We have our gutter width, which is all the same for every device. And then these last things, are our items nestable? Yes. Do our items have offsets? Yes. And is there column ordering? Yes. So here we can look at a grid layout. This is a fantastic visual representation of exactly what your divs or whatever elements you use will look in the grid. That top one, it takes 12 spaces. The second one is 2 columns taking 6 spaces. Because remember, we have a 12 column row for everything. So you'll see the division. We have 3 made of 4. We have 6 made of 2. And then you can even change size. They don't have to be the same size all around. You could have 1 4 and 1 8. How should we write pages using a grid? This can get confusing, but the more you work with it, the easier it'll be to understand and read. First, we see that we have a little note. Every row must have 12 columns. We just saw that in the above example. We're going to start with a div. The class name of this div is row, and it's going to be really important that we're using class names here and not IDs. Remember, IDs are attributes of specific elements. Class names are for more general grouping. So inside of our div with the class name row, we're going to start organizing our content. We're going to make a div with the class name col mid 4. So this is going to take 4 spaces up out of our 12. We need to put 8 more columns within this, but we'll get there. So Bootstrap 3 has a responsive grid, and these are some maximum sizes. Just to keep in mind, you'll never be able to make a grid bigger than this. For our extra small, grids have no maximum size. They're completely fluid. Small grids are going to resize up to 750 pixels. Medium are going to resize up to 970 pixels. And large are going to resize up to 1170 pixels. So for desktop, you're going to go for mid or large. And now we're going to look at some grid examples. What do Bootstrap grids even look like? Well, we can start getting into the examples. The first one that we'll use is called stacked to horizontal. It's going to give us 2 columns. So first we start with a div. The div will have a class name container. Inside of this container, we're going to have a second div. This div will be called row. Inside of the div called row, we will create 2 more divs. Both will be called col-md-6, meaning these are columns that take up 6 spaces each, totaling 12. Inside of each div, you'll see 2 different p tags or paragraph tags. So if we were to put this code into our HTML page and render it onto a web page, it'll look like this. Now this is a very basic way to get started and get building. The class name container is specifically used in Bootstrap, so that will give you automatic centering and maximum width for your layout. Then after you create a container for everything, you should think about how you actually want to display your information. Every row in the grid is made up of 12 units, so as long as what you're making equals 12, you can have it in there. We did 6 plus 6, but you could do 6 units of 2, you could do 3, 3, 4, and 2. Your possibilities are finite, but you have a couple. Now let's look at some styling that's better suited for medium and large device sizes. We're going to use two divs and give them a 50-50 split at the medium viewport. So we start as we did before with a container class, and we're going to define our row. Our divs are going to be a little bit different. We're going to give it the col medium 6, but also col large 4. And another example, we could work on mobile, tablet, and desktop. It's going to give us 3 different column layouts. On a phone, container will be 25% to the left and 75% to the right. On a tablet, it'll be 50-50, and on a large viewpoint, it'll be 33-63, just like we saw above. This is what responsive layouts are. And you see, you put just right in there accounting for everything. You have your column small 9 and your column small 3, still column medium 6, and still column large 8 and 4. And here's another example using 2 different grid sizes to represent different screen sizes. And that's the end for part 2. Pretty simple, pretty easy. Sometimes grids can get a little confusing, but once we start populating data into them, it's a breeze. Thank you so much, and I will see you in part 3. And welcome back to part 3 of Intro to Web Design with Bootstrap. You should be aware that Bootstrap only uses HTML5, which is the most current version of HTML. To ensure you're using HTML5, just use this boilerplate code in your HTML file. And just like we talked about previously, Bootstrap 3 allows us to have responsive images. This means that our image tag can scale depending on what device you're viewing the web page from. Down below, you can see the same web page on different devices. I did mention briefly in the last part that the class name container has significance to Bootstrap. And here we can examine the Bootstrap CSS file and see that they have created something for us with padding and margin that creates a completely centered div. And it's honestly pretty cool to have access to something like this. You can look at these things and model your own CSS after it. You can see exactly how something is done. You're getting the recipe by Gordon Ramsay from Gordon Ramsay, you know? That's where I'm going to wrap up part 3A. Come back for part 3B. And welcome back to Intro to Web Design with Bootstrap. We're in part 3B. Let's talk about typography. Bootstrap comes with the fonts Helvetica Neue, Helvetica, Arial, and sans serif. Getbootstrap.com will have all the documentation for everything that they have, so you can see what it looks like before you try to use it. Right here we can see these are what the H1 through H6 will look like in our application. We can also do something called inline subheadings. This will make use of the small class within our H1 through H6, so you can have a difference of sizes. And just like in regular HTML, we have list items. Those will come as an unordered list, which just bullet points, ordered list, which will come 1, 2, 3, 4, and definition list. Right here we see some examples of what those actually look like when we have them on the page. An ordered list and an unordered list. And that is it for part 3. Come back next time and we'll talk about tables. Welcome to part 4 of Intro to Web Design with Bootstrap. Let's talk about the basic table with Bootstrap. We can actually go to the Bootstrap documentation and see an exact example of what this is going to look like. And we can quickly look at the anatomy, but this is all pre-made, and the things that you're going to change are like number, first, last, handle, and the input.
but don't worry about the actual code that's being written. That's by Bootstrap, and you want to stick to that. All HTML tables are defined with this table tag. This creates our table element. Each row is going to be defined with the TR tag, and the table header is defined with the TH tag. And that's going to be inside of this thread. So we create our table, we open up a thread, we define a table row, and we define our table headers, and then we close those and close our thread. Next, we create the table body, TB. And this is where we put our information pertaining to each individual header that we made. Then if we want something that's a little bit more than just basic, we can make a striped table. And to just get this effect, what this looks like, all you have to do is add table-striped to the class name. But remember, keep the original table name as well. And this can only add color to things that are in the body. Next, let's look at something called a bordered table. This has defined borders on all sides of all table and cells. To apply this, it's the same thing as table striped, except just write table-boarded. And here you can see where their third input has a different row span than everything else. They accounted for that in their code. We also could use hoverable tables, and that just simply allows the rows to get highlighted as you hover over them on the page. And you can just enable that by adding table-hover to the class name of the table. Bootstrap also offers responsive tables, which allows you to scroll from left to right through the table. And this means that now you can fit really big tables on really small screens. And Bootstrap even lets us know exactly how they do it. They leave us a note where they let us know that they just set overflow Y to hidden. This doesn't allow content to go beyond the bottom or the top edges of the table. However, when this is enabled, it can clip off the bottom of other things that you have going on your page, so it's something that you want to do with caution. And that's it for part 4A. I will see you in part 4B, where we talk about forms. And welcome back to Intro to Web Design with Bootstrap, part 4B, Forms. Bootstrap does provide us with a couple different types of forms: a vertical default form, an inline left to right form, or a horizontal form. First, we can just take a look at the vertical or basic form. This will start with a form tag. And in the form tag, we're going to create a role, and we will give that role the value of the string form. Inside of our form, we're going to create a div with the class name form-group. And remember, these names are all very important for Bootstrap to get the correct styling. Inside of our div, because this is a form, we know that we're going to need an input. But an input like this always needs a label. Our label will ask us, what is this label for? We say it's for the name. That directly relates to the ID of our input, which we will get to in a second. The label will be represented with this name we see in between the two label tags. We create an input tag. Inputs always need a type because our machine needs to know exactly what it's looking for. This time, we're going to say text. So we say type equals text. Class, we're going to give the class name form-control, and our ID is name. The ID of the input needs to exactly match the for of the label. And then the placeholder, that's what the user will see before they enter anything into that input. And we close the div and we close the form. Maybe you need to create a form, but you don't have that much vertical space. Well, you could make an inline form where your information goes from left to right. To create an inline form, it's as simple as just adding form-inline as a class name to your form element. And the majority of what Bootstrap is just doing is giving you pre-made CSS for HTML that everyone already has access to. The last form that we'll talk about today is the horizontal form. This form uses a grid pattern to display the labels and inputs. You can access it by adding a row class name to the form group and using the col-blank-blank.
If you have enjoyed watching this video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.
Classes that we used before to specify the width of the labels and the controls. And make sure that you add col-form-label to your label to make sure that it aligns perfectly with your input. And you can go to getbootstrap.com to check out all the different examples of things you can do in forms that they provide for you already made. And that's going to be it for part 4 of Intro to Web Design with Bootstrap. Come back for part 5. Thank you guys so much. Welcome back to Intro to Web Design with Bootstrap, part 5. What makes Bootstrap so amazing, flexible, and versatile are its components. A Bootstrap element or a component could be anything from a navbar, a button, a list. Bootstrap offers so many different kinds of components. We can see just right over here. Alerts, badges, buttons, carousels, drop-downs, navs. And that's it for part 5A. Come back in part 5B and we'll talk about buttons. Welcome back to Intro to Web Design with Bootstrap, part 5B. Let's talk about buttons. HTML provides us a standard button, which we can access through a button tag. However, if we give those buttons a class name of btn or button, we can start accessing Bootstrap styling. With just that initial btn, we'll get a gray rounded corner button, but Bootstrap has way more than just that. If we go to Bootstrap's documentation, we can see all the examples of buttons they offer, and also grab the code for it while we're here. Using btn-primary along btn for a class name will give us a blue button, or if we wanted that yellow, we could do btn-warning. And if you thought that that was enough, Bootstrap offers more. You could do that same idea, but just with an outline of a button. You could change the size of your button with a large button or a small button, a block level button that'll span the width of its parent element, and buttons that actually interact with being clicked on. As of right now, Bootstrap doesn't have any built-in icons, but you could go to icons.getbootstrap.com and take a look at a new project that they're working on. Here they have a bunch of icons that you can choose from that are SVG, which means that they are vector graphics, so they scale without any loss of resolution. They have a lot of things to choose from, and you can get started by following their installation directions. And that's it for Intro to Web Design with Bootstrap, Part 5B. Come back for Part 5C, where we'll talk about using images. Welcome back to Intro to Web Design with Bootstrap, Part 5C. Let's talk about images and using images in our designs. Bootstrap actually provides us with a couple classes that we can use. First is rounded. This will add a 5-pixel border to the edges of your image. The next is going to be rounded circle. This is going to make a circle out of your image. And the last is it'll take any image and make a thumbnail, which gives it this little border and some padding. And that'll be it for Part 5B, Images. Come back for the next lesson on helper classes. And welcome back to Intro to Web Design with Bootstrap, Part 5D. Let's talk about helper classes. A helper class in Bootstrap is a class name that we can utilize for its styling abilities. There are text options where we could choose something like text-success and get text styled with this green color. Or we could use it as a background color. If we do BG/warning, we'll get a background color that's the same as that warning button we saw in the earlier lesson. Other useful classes are close, which you can use to close a modal or close a pop-up. Invisible, which forces an element to be invisible. You could do pull-left or pull-right, and that'll float an element to their respective side. And that's it for helper classes. Come back in the next lesson where we'll talk about the newest features in Bootstrap 4. And welcome back to Intro to Web Design with Bootstrap, Part 5E. Bootstrap is working on a new release which is currently in alpha. Some of the major and noteworthy changes that are coming up will include the use of SAS instead of LESS, less. SAS is short for Syntactically Awesome Style Sheet. It's its own language that's compiled into CSS. Bootstrap will also be releasing a new grid tier for smaller screens. It'll target devices under 480 pixels. Bootstrap will be releasing something called cards to replace their wells, thumbnails, and panels. Bootstrap will introduce relative CSS units. It'll ditch pixels and start using REMs or EMs for more responsive typography. You can now opt in or opt out of the Flexbox module as it isn't supported by all browsers. Because of SAS's integration into Bootstrap, you now have the ability to customize your colors, spacing, link styles, and many more in a direct CSS custom file. Bootstrap also refactored its JavaScript plugins. And that'll be it for Intro to Web Design with Bootstrap, Part 5. Hello, and welcome to the final part of Intro to Web Design with Bootstrap. Congratulations on making it through the whole course. Here are just a couple things I want to share with you. If you go to github.com/bootstrapbay/tutorials, you can fork and clone this repo on your machine. Once you get it up and running, just follow the directions in the README so you can practice your skills. If you're interested in live coaching for HTML and CSS, coding-bootcamps.com offers weekly and monthly passes for their tutoring sessions. And here are some additional resources for you to utilize so you can keep up on the latest technology and stay sharp. wrapbootstrap.com, bootswatch.com, startbootstrap.com, and you can also check out these Bootstrap supported fonts from fontawesome.github.io/font-awesome. And other classes that we have available to you: Intro to HTML and CSS, Intro to HTML5 and CSS3, the most updated and current versions, Intro to JavaScript, learn Node.js, Express.js, and MongoDB, learn Node.js, Express.js, and MongoDB, Intro to Angular.js Framework, Intro to React.js Framework, and also Vue.js Framework. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope this course is helpful and you can use these skills to build a beautiful website. Have a great day. And visit coding-bootcamps.com for any questions.